two things. This sermon today was a little bit shorter because we knew we had the extra long canticle. But also the subject of this story. I mean, if Kierkegaard can write 200 words about this story, trying to get a sermon into about two plus pages is a little difficult. So I had a lot of extra material that was there in the sermon at one point and then had to go. So I want to do a couple things about the story, and then a couple of folks have already have hand given me some questions about today. So I want to first mention that today's story was one of 4 different versions of God's promise to Abraham. And that's key to understand. There's 4 different versions of the story of God blessing Abraham. And this is the one, because at the end of the story, that's when the angel comes and says to Abraham, well now that you've done this, God will make your descendants as many as the stars of the sea and the stars of the sky and sands of the sea. God had already promised this to Abraham in other versions. So understand there's competing stories about Abraham's blessing, Abraham's covenant, which means we don't have to believe all of them because they're contradictory. This one particularly is a conditional covenant. Notice that God only gave God's blessing after Abraham proved that he would do anything for God, even kill his child. Now, okay, other than that's a severely messed up way of thinking about God, this is deep roots in the Hebrew Bible. Deuteronomy, the whole theology around Deuteronomy is that God's covenant with us is conditional, and that how we respond to God is how God responds to us. Now, there are other stories. In fact, the first story of this series, today's the last one of the series, the first story in Genesis 12, there's no condition. God just simply asks Abraham to go, I'll show you a way, and that's it. And God offers this blessing, I will make you a great name and a great nation, and you'll be a blessing for others, unconditionally. It's just given. So this idea of God's covenant with us as conditional and unconditional is a debate that's been going on for people who follow the God of Israel for 3,000 or more years possibly. So it's quite natural that we still have that discussion today because it is embedded in the Bible and both versions are there. And as readers of the Bible and people of faith, we can choose which one we want to believe. Or if somehow we want to believe both versions, we can try to do that. But we're not tied to any one thing. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is that, one of the things I said at the beginning was, this is a story. I'm just sliding it off the table that this really happened, that God told Abraham to do this, to kill his son. And as well, last week's, I don't believe that God told Abraham, yeah, do what Sarah said and get rid of Ishmael as well. I just can't believe that. Now, if you believe that, that's fine. Maybe you've got some discussion we're going to have with that. However, for much of Christian history, it's been assumed that God really did ask Abraham to do this. And so for 20th century biblical commentators, sometimes they tried to understand the later stories about Isaac in light of this. Isaac, of the 4 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, of the 4 patriarchs, Isaac is the minor character. And so some biblical scholars trying to make sense of this awful story before we talked about PTSD essentially said that's what happened, that Isaac was a minor character because of the trauma from this story. So there's only 2 main stories about Isaac in Genesis. One was this one, and the other one, who knows what the other one is? Yell it. Yes, when Jacob took advantage of his father's elderly health situation, nearly blind, couldn't hear, and he tricked him. So again, Isaac is a victim, right? The blessing was stolen. So for those who kind of want that perspective, that God really did this, the trauma is there from the story, if you believe that. Phyllis Tribble also notes, which I couldn't go into the story. I love Phyllis Tribble, and she writes so much about these stories. But she also notes that the story really doesn't end so well, if you look at the long view of the story. I mean, Abraham leaves the mountain, and the text does not say that Isaac accompanied him. What does that mean? And does that mean that maybe Isaac was sacrificed? Or does it mean that Isaac said, from here on out, Dad, I want nothing to do with you. You're going back that way, I'm going another way. What happens to Isaac is in silence. Also, if you follow along in the text, Sarah moves to Hebron while Abraham goes to Beersheba. Maybe she decides, I ain't sticking with this guy anymore after all that. Never again in the text does Abraham and Isaac speak to one another. Nor does God and Abraham ever speak to one another. So, if this was a real story and not just a parable, the trauma goes on if you follow the way the text goes. So, that's the second thing I want to say. Third thing I should say, which I really wanted to say in the sermon, but I really thought I don't have time to do this, is that Kate Bowler is still alive, okay? If I, just want to say that. She got past the year. It's now been 8 years since she wrote that book. McGay and I recently she spoke here in town at Carolina Theater, and we heard her lecture and talk back. And she has another book out, of course. She's one of these theologians that writes and writes and writes and writes. But I really thought that in her book, piece I couldn't put in the sermon, where she tries to live out what her friend and colleague, the Duke, said to her, don't skip to the end. Because when she was making these decisions about, do I continue my chemotherapy that is just destroying my body, or do I trust this immunotherapy will be all I need? How do you make that decision, right? And when you're in those situations, you're always trying to go to the end, right? If I make this decision, then this will happen. And I'll make this decision based on what that will be. But the reality is we can never know what that will be. And all these painful decisions are about right now. And the right now is, what do I believe? What do I value most? Who do I want to be? And so one of the questions somebody asked is, how do you do that? How do you avoid skipping to the end? Because with all these great decisions, these painful decisions, we want to know what's going to happen. As if I utilitarian know what's going to happen, then I'll base my decision on that. But when we do that, that's when we always compromise who we are. Because we can never know what's going to happen. We have to make our decisions and live with them. And in making those decisions, we do become who we are. So that's that piece. One other person wanted to know about Isaac being Abraham's only son. Of course, in the text today, he's Abraham's only son because last week he got rid of his other son. Which shouldn't shock us. I mean, if you're going to sacrifice one son, what's sacrificing another son? Part of the story. But the reality is, today's writer may not have known about the other story. Remember, all these stories are collected later on, and some editor's trying to bring them together. So maybe this writer knew about that, or maybe not. So there's enough of that. Also, and this is a question for David, maybe you may know, I don't know this answer. Somebody asked, is there any historical reference to the words in the drama that support Isaac's words in the story? And so, as a biblical scholar, I would say no. But there is history with us. And all these mystery plays, David, by the way, I did my dissertation, for my doctoral dissertation on drama in worship and studied mystery plays, and so miracle plays. All these dramas were written to try to help a mostly illiterate culture understand the story. You have to remember that at this time when this play was written, worship in the sanctuary was spoken in Latin, and few people spoke Latin anymore. So when you're in worship, you didn't understand most of the stuff that was being said. And so the mystery plays, the miracle plays of the late Middle Ages helped bring the Bible to life. And so to do that, you had to write a dramatic story. And that's what happens in the story. David, you got any thoughts on that? On the words that you all sang?
Well, I did read, I actually went back and looked. So there's 333 pages worth of the Chester.
Pick his mic up better. He's not picking up.
Well, I'm not close. I'm not close to it either or supporting. There's like 333 pages of Chester mystery plays. And so they were in the 15th century. And the words that Britten chose were pretty much all in there. It was written in Old English. There's a lot that was left out. But yeah, the play supported most of what Isaac was saying and what Abraham was saying. The only real difference is in the Canticle. God is written as both the beginning and the end, where in the mystery play and in the story, it's actually two angels at the end versus God at the end. But I think that was a musical choice. But the Chester mystery plays were actually put to a stop for papery, and they have since had a revival. But yeah, they were put to a stop by the Queen.
So the historical part comes from a culture 600 years ago trying to understand this story and how it played out as humans. And while there's no biblical references to what Isaac said, there is an emotional and human element to trying to understand what happened. And that's where you get Isaac's words put in. So the fascinating thing about today's musical piece is that it really helps us capture how we as people of faith and as human beings have tried to grapple with the story for hundreds of years. All right, who's got some more questions for us? Yeah, come on up to the mic. And I'm going to ask, when you come to the mic, please introduce yourself and then go ahead.
I'm Kate Green, and did anyone catch the reference in the presentation to Jesus? Here we are talking about Old Testament Abraham. Jesus wasn't even around then, and then there was a reference to the Trinity as well.
I caught it, because I had to sing it. So, these would have been players, right? So this was a theater piece. They would have been players. And so I think, like what Tim said, is the players were trying to tell a story in a way that people would understand. And so, they were telling this Old Testament story through the lens of, Christians at the time. And so, yeah, as Isaac, and that's actually something that's really interesting, because as Abraham, I'm like, Jesus, why am I having to do this? And then I'm giving a blessing of the Trinity. And that's the very first thing, when you learn this, I'm like, why are you doing this? But yeah, that is a good catch, and that means I enunciated well enough that you could hear that. Of course, it was in the bulletin as well. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to point out.
Yeah, and Kate, I would say your question is evidence that we are in a post-Christendom age, and the mystery play was written when European culture was deeply Christian. And so how else could you understand God other than through that lens? Yeah, come on.
I'm Matt Clark.
Hey, Mac.
And this may be referring to the same thing, but I'm on page 4, where Abraham is speaking to his son Isaac, and about halfway down the page, Abraham says, Isaac, son, peace, I pray thee. Thou breakest my heart even in 3. First question is it supposed to be a semicolon in there, Isaac's son, peace, and then semicolon, I pray thee, thou breakest my heart even in 3, and is that the reference to the Trinity, or what is the 3 reference there?
Yeah, Mac, I don't know. David, you got a hope with that?
I know my interpretation because Isaac says, thou breakest my heart in 3 twice in this. And so I do think that it is a very specific reference to the Trinity, and just the significance of the number 3 in Christianity related to the Trinity. So that was my interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds as good as guess as I. Mac, if you want a better answer, you can spend all day asking AI. Maybe they'll tell the rest of the thing. Eddie, come on up.
I'm Eddie Bell. Is it not about the music? Is this, if you look at this story as a test of Abraham, is there any relationship to what happened in Job? Is that it? You know that.
Yeah, and I think, Eddie, that's there's certain. I mean, we all know in life we get tested, right? If you have a job, your boss is probably going to test you at some point, right? If you're a parent, you know your children have tested you at some point, right? We test relationships. That happens in life. Can we trust this person? Now, to say, I'm going to test you on this, that's where it gets really tough, right? You don't often want to say what you're doing, right? You just want to kind of experience, can I trust this person? Are they trustworthy? And the only way you find that out is through the test of life. Now, so one of the things, the questions comes with the story is, if this is a real story, as brutal as it is, you know, what does it mean that God tested Abraham? As you referenced, the story of Job is all the same kind of thing. But is that a story or is that real? And because in both cases, terrible things happen. You know, I would hope to think that we don't worship a monster God that does little tests just to figure out. When I would hope God is just good enough to know, or great enough to know what's in my heart, right? But maybe not. So that is one of the questions that's in this whole idea of a conditional covenant. Does God bless us? Is God's promises to us based on what we do, or are they unconditional? And for me, I fall way on the unconditional side. So the parts of the Bible where we talk about God's unconditional grace, God's unconditional love, I'm all in. And where the parts of the stories talk about, well, God's love is conditional if we do certain things, I fight back. I take these passages and fight these passages. So that's how I handle that. But you are right that this idea of testing is throughout the Bible. And it is because life tests us, right? How are we to understand God when we see this life where life tests us continually? Does that make sense? Did I answer it somewhat? Okay, thank you, Ed. Who's next? Yeah, Nancy.
Good morning, I'm Nancy Culp, and I don't know if it was in the play. I didn't catch it if it was or in the sermon, but it's in the scripture where God says, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. And we hear that a lot, be God-fearing, fear God. Why would we fear God? That's negative consequences. If we're in relationship with God, we fear God. So I've always been curious about the fear.
Yeah, so the Hebrew word for fear also has a sense of reverence, that you revere God. Now, I have to get Phyllis Strobel, a couple other writers, to make sure in that instance it was that word. But oftentimes the word used to fear God means to revere God. And in some translations you will see that interpreted that way. But I think there's other times in which it seems like it means fear, like be scared of. And there is this tense of relationships that are bigger than us. I mean, have you ever had like maybe a teacher or a coach or maybe one of your parents at some point in your life where you actually feared that person a little bit? And because of that, you had great respect for what they said and did, and you watched it because you knew, you had a sense of, if I cross the line with this person, I'm going to get it. And so it's this weird thing as you're growing up as a child of both respecting certain adults but also really kind of fearing them as well. Does that make sense? And I have to imagine for biblical writers, they had the same experiences that you and I have today of growing up as young people, as children, where everyone's bigger than you, everyone's greater than you, more powerful than you. There is a certain fear in that. So I do kind of wonder if that's why the Hebrews picked that word, which has this double meaning of to fear, to be scared of, but also to revere and to respect. So broadly, that's my answer for that. In that particular sense, I don't know if the verb they used really is that one or not. So, yeah. David, do you have anything to say to that? Yeah?
I think that comes out of many centuries of people accusing diseases coming from God.
Sure. Yes. Ancient people had to figure out why do things happen? You know, why are we in a drought when the past 5 years we had plenty of rain? What do we do to cause that? You know, and likewise, health situations. Yeah, Leah?
Janet Miller. I used to say my favorite kind of movies were the ones that made me feel everything. Well, this worship service made me feel everything. It's to you and to you. And first of all, I was furious at God, which is kind of funny because I don't really believe the Bible is word for word true that way. I don't know why I was so quick to get mad and believe that. And when you said, Tim, I don't believe this, I was like, yeah, I really don't either. But anyway, I was furious. And then, David, when you and Madeline presented that story musically as you did, and you imbued it with so much feeling, and the words themselves were so beautiful, I just wept the whole way through it. And I want to thank you both and just say what a powerful, incredibly meaningful service this was for me.
Thank you, Jan. You got anything you want to say?
Thank you.
Was it how was the emotions for you in presenting this piece? Or what did you have to tap into?
Complicated,
Yeah.
because I too thought, okay, and for for Isaac, there's more clear-cut emotion. For Abraham, I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And we really didn't even, David Tang was like, I think you figured it out today. But I was like, what am I doing? Like, and the only thing I could rationalize was that, Abraham was given Isaac as a gift and felt, okay, this was being asked of me. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it. Isaac was given as a gift. So if God give, I guess God can take away. I will say that for me personally, the other thing that I was very happy that we got to do was, one, that we got to do this here at Myers Park, but apparently it had been done before. And two, that we got to do this in Pride Month, because as many of you know, Benjamin Britten is a queer composer. And so we got to do this on like the last Sunday of Pride Month. But I struggled with that too, to figure out how to do that. Like, because I didn't want to, right? I didn't want to. So it was weird.
Yeah, and part of the thing, and part of the story, you have to be the bad guy, right? You're the guy who's going to kill your son, which is a bad thing. And yet, also this person of faith who thinks God's calling. It's a lot of mixed things there. Yeah. And thanks for mentioning Pride Month. One piece that didn't make the sermon was one point was how often parents who can't handle their child's coming out sacrifice their
Well, I
children.
almost wonder, you know, Britten is a prolific composer, and Britten did a lot of stuff. I mean, I almost wonder why Britten chose the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? I mean, that's such an interesting choice as a queer person. So I also kind of find that interesting.
Susan.
We talk
And about Isaac being a gift. I really don't like the property ownership of that. I don't like one person owning another person. And that really sticks in my craw there and then down through the ages.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Yeah. Yeah, we can, I mean, I think, how do we receive gifts? You know, and I think a lot of parents talk about their children being gifts. I'm sure I've used that phrase before. And yet, my children made pretty clear to me early in life that I didn't own them. So.
Hi, I'm Corinne Cranford. I have a question for all the musicians. You made it look easy, and I'm sure that a lot of work went into it. I'm curious to know how much every performance or rehearsal varied with tempo and expression, and then what kind of adjustments Janice Bradner had to make as an accompanist to
And
follow
Janice hasn't
that.
stepped out yet, so she can pop into it. Yeah. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Well, it's actually a trio. So the piano part is just as important as the two singers, really. And luckily, we do have Janice. And Janice is also a coach. So, you know, and a good collaborative pianist will be a coach with singers. So rehearsals usually go like we're doing something, and you know, a good pianist, a good collaborative pianist will hear something and also provide feedback. So you can speak to that more, but I mean, it changed basically. And even from our last rehearsal on Thursday, there were things that happened today that didn't happen Thursday.
And that's the way of life. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Get real close to it.
We're just
Get close to it.
spoken.
It was absolutely phenomenal to be able to be a part of this. So thank you, Tim. I am. I'm right in it. I'm right in
Pop
it.
it up a little bit.
Maybe that'll help. I hear a little bit now. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, David Tang, who watched the whole thing this morning and has been texting continually about what he saw and heard. I mean, it was just wonderful to be able to be a part of this experience. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody here for sitting back and taking this in, because you don't get an opportunity to do that in a church on a Sunday morning. So appreciate that. Somebody asked me how much we practiced. We had a rehearsal with David Tang 3 weeks ago before he left. Then we had a rehearsal on Thursday, and then we ran through a couple things this morning. So that's, you know, everybody learns their part, and you come together, and somebody says, oh, I'm doing this, will you do that? And I'll say, that didn't work, let's try this. And it's a very collaborative job, and one that I love. It was wonderful to be able to work with these people, and I don't know, what else do you want to know? It's just what we do.
Probably less rehearsal than you thought.
Yeah, but everybody does their own rehearsal
Yeah.
and comes back in and puts it together.
Well, thank you again. Yep. Jane.
I'm Jane Summey. Tim, in your sermon, you said, God intervened, but life doesn't always turn out that way. And then you moved right on to something else. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I don't know that I have to, I mean, doesn't that just happen? I mean, right? We have this hope that God's going to intervene and change things, and sometimes things don't change. Now, if I had more time in the sermon, notice that a couple times, I think it's even in our liturgy in the call to worship. The last thing we said as a people, teach us, O Lord, that we are never trapped into a corner, that somewhere you provide another way, or another way to understand what we must face. And this whole took the idea from Dick Hester's book on narrative theology, is that, and this actually goes to touch what Dr. Beasley Fladd mentioned last week, the Buddhist teaching of the two arrows, if y'all were here part of that piece, that the one arrow hits you and you're injured. But the second arrow is, so some event happens in your life and injury, but the second arrow is the story you tell yourself about that injury. And we all carry these narrative stories in us. And this is partly how we skip to the end. And what's the narrative we tell us? And so I like to believe that God can provide the ram, and last week that God provides the water in the desert, but I know from life that doesn't always happen. That just flat out doesn't happen all the time. But I do think God can give us another way to understand the pickle we are in. And that oftentimes that can be the most important thing. I mean, we're all terminal, right? Nobody gets out of this life alive, right? So whatever story you have about facing cancer or a heart attack or some terrible thing, and you survive that, and it's a great survival story, but folks, the end is we're gonna die. We're all terminal. So how do we understand that? And so that sometimes there is the ram in the thicket, so we don't have to sacrifice Isaac, or there's the well in the desert, but sometimes they're not. And how do we understand that? And I do think God can provide us a way that makes us whole even when we're in the midst of whatever tragedy we're going to face. Okay, you've been standing so kind. Thank you.
For me, today, not discounting your words, the music was my whole sermon. It was magnificent, beautifully done, and well spoken through music.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yep.
Thank you. And as you've heard several times, he had to cut his sermon so much in order to make that happen. So I feel a sense of guilt for that.
No. It was all pleasure to do. Yep. Anybody else? Are we about out of energy? Because if we're about energy, we'll call it a day. Anybody got one more burning question? All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great day. Have a good holiday week. We'll see you next week.